So firstly, welcome and thank you both to Ruth Mackay, who's director at Unique Marketing in Edinburgh, um, and to Joshua Ryan Saha, who is from the Data Driven Innovation Centre in Edinburgh and is the lead for tourism, festivals and infrastructure at University of Edinburgh. We are delighted that you could join us today, and this session is on supporting tourism and leisure and how we can do that through technology. Just before I bring in our speakers who know a lot more about this than I do, it's worth positioning that tourism is worth £10.5 billion to the Scottish economy and 257 billion to the overall UK economy. It accounts for 10% of UK GDP and 11% of jobs. Slightly lower at 8% of jobs in Scotland, hugely significant. In Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festivals alone contribute over £1 billion to the Scottish economy, with visitors delivering a direct spend of around 500 million per year. Tourism and leisure have been incredibly badly hit by the COVID-19 crisis, and it's also a hugely important sector to the recovery. So what we wanted to focus on today is what can we do? What technologies and programs can support recovery in the sector to help it thrive again? How do we make the data work for us and support recovery and growth? And how do we bring the digital tech and data-driven innovation to the heart of this and to the heart of the recovery? So a couple of fairly chunky questions for us to focus on there. Ruth, Joshua, if I could hand over to you and maybe just give us a little overview of your roles and why you're here, and then tell us what you think. How can we make that happen? In no particular order, Joshua, if I start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as already mentioned, Joshua Ryan. I'm the data-driven innovation lead for tourism, festivals, infrastructure. One other role that I've got only in the last couple of weeks, really, is now that I'll be the director of something called Travel Tech for Scotland, which is looking at the application of technology to the tourism industry in Scotland. And my background has been I worked at an organisation called the Data Lab here in Scotland as well, where I was the head of skills. And before that, I worked at Nesta, where I was working on challenge prizes and various things like that. Also had a stint in Bosnia and Slovenia as a tourist and and working. So that's a bit of my experience from the tourism side. Would it be? Do you want me to go through just a quick summary of some of the sort of mini talk bit now? Would that be useful, Jane?
Yes, that would be absolutely great. Thank you.
So I'll be trying to be super quick to just for a start, but because I have these two roles, one which is from University of Edinburgh looking at data-driven innovation in tourism, in particular around the Edinburgh City region, and then this new travel tech cluster, I'm going to start with the sort of data-driven innovation component and just give a few thoughts on how data-driven innovation has been applied historically within sort of tourism destinations, and how I think the need for sort of data technologies is more urgent now than it was sort of pre-COVID. I think the first part really is we've been working on the program of work for about 18 months, and there's two key areas for Edinburgh that always seem to be the major priority. And I'm thinking of Edinburgh because that was the area we're looking at. One was overcrowding. I think Edinburgh has been a place which has historically had hotspots that get overcrowded. I wouldn't say over tourism from my personal perspective, but others would. And what we've wanted to do is use technology to diversify and broaden the experience that people have when they come to Edinburgh and the city region. And how do we do that? So we had a couple of projects that we were looking at. One of them was trying to understand using sensors in the city to understand where those overcrowding hotspots take place, especially during the festivals, and then trying to optimize the transport infrastructure related to it, which has been a pretty bold project. And one of the things we found when looking at both event listings from the list and when we were looking at festival events and then transport data that we managed to get from bus companies is that all the shows as part of the Fringe Festival were closed at the same time that everyone was sort of leaving to go home from work. And we were able to try and optimize a few things there. The reason I mention that story is that the festivals in Edinburgh is one of the biggest events in the world. They say it's the third biggest after only the World Cup and the Olympics. And we were fantastically brilliant at organising it. But actually, data was going to be really useful in trying to make those marginal gains in terms of efficiency around how people get from A to B. We thought that both sensors, combining different data sets from different companies, and potentially even some computer vision and camera work, and trying to work out how we could make some quick decisions that might just make that flow work a bit better was an important thing. That's relevant now, because although we're not having the crowds, we need to maintain distance between people. So we need to understand how close people are and where the pinch points might be for safety. So the same technology, I think, around IoT, monitoring flow is relevant for destination now because of that safety and infection control aspect. We funded a project called SimSpread, which is looking at the city Wi-Fi data in Edinburgh to understand how people flow historically, so that we can predict where those pinch points might be for future big citywide events, which we of course want to come back as quickly as possible. And then we can start putting in remedial actions. So that is in collaboration with the council, it's in collaboration with Events Scotland. The other area which I think is relevant before and post-COVID was about prediction and forecasting. Now, tourism is quite a slow uptake of technology, I think. Well, in some ways. In other ways, it's been a very fast uptake. But from a destination level, it's been quite slow. And it's very difficult to predict who's going to come and when. So we've been working with the School of Mathematics here at University of Edinburgh to start developing some forecasting models based on whatever historic data we have. And the idea was that we'd just turn it into a 3-month prediction, thinking about sort of like US election forecasts and trying to put a 3-month prediction around how many people and where they're going to come from to Edinburgh. Now, that's even more important now because we just don't know when new markets will open up, when people might be able to fly, when new attractions might open up, and also what the search intention behavior might be, and what is the historic track record of people coming to Edinburgh, as an example. And so we're actually funding a smaller project now that is just looking at historic data sets of who came to Edinburgh in the past, search intention behavior, so who is wanting to come back, and then the third thing, who's actually able to, both from an economic consumer confidence perspective and also from is it open, is there other flights perspective, and then developing that as a dashboard that any tourism company can look at. So they're the sort of that's the sort of types of projects we're looking at the moment from data-driven innovation and tourism perspective. But for both of those, it's important that the information from these sort of collective data projects goes back and is fed to all the small tourism companies and medium-sized tourism companies so they can act upon better information. And then the final thing, so I'm going on a bit too long, was with Travel Tech for Scotland. We had to reposition everything we were trying to do in terms of developing a cluster. We were hoping that, these serendipitous moments of coffee and cake or whatever we were going to try and do at events were going to work, and we're thinking, well, actually, that's not going to cut it anymore. So we're shifting to a very digital way of doing things, of course, which makes sense. And the things we're thinking about starting are around, first of all, coming up with a clear directory of the types of travel tech organizations in Scotland that can start to address some of the very specific challenges facing tourism companies now. Things like, maintaining social distancing, or contactless payments, or pre-booking, which is going to be really essential for a range of smaller attractions, for example. And there's been a really amazing community response, especially from furloughed members of staff in the tourism sector here in Scotland, to come up with guides already that start to identify where these technology solutions might come in. The other thing I think is thinking about converting to a digital experience, the festivals, and I would certainly not talk too much about this because unique events would be in the forefront of this. But how do you develop it as a digital experience as a precursor to a real lived experience? I mean, we want people to come back to Edinburgh and enjoy all the amazing experiences that I have to offer. So that's going to be a really interesting area. And then the final thing I think is just technology adoption is so interesting for tourism at the moment because it's historically been so poor. And now it's just on an absolute huge ramp up, because everyone has to do it to be open, to actually be able to run. And doing that right is going to be really hard. So one of the things we're starting to develop already is a very quick course that will go alongside the directory, which is talking about how you do digital adoption right for small tourism companies. So sorry, I probably went on a little bit long, but that's my my thoughts at the current moment.
We will come back to that. I think it's really interesting, and I think it's wonderful that there is a travel tech cluster now that's going to bring that expertise together and help to tackle some of this going forward. Ruth.
Well, firstly, I'd start by saying I completely agree with Joshua. In my experience, and it's not just leisure and tourism, you tend to find very traditional industries have been quite slow in the uptake to adopting technology. So my role, if you like, is that we're a sales and marketing agency based in Edinburgh, and we've done a lot of work with tourism destinations, hotels, lots of different businesses who are in that industry. In fact, turns out we're working with more of them than we had appreciated when this all happened, and we lost pretty much all of them out of our portfolio. But I guess from my experience, one of the real challenges is trying to sell those technology solutions into those businesses. And I think, so that's kind of one key area. And I also think another key area for us, because we do digital marketing, is about how do we encourage more small, medium-sized leisure tourism-based companies to actually adopt new marketing approaches. I think that in terms of us selling those technology solutions, so we also work with technology companies as well. So I've seen it sort of from both sides. And one of the real gaps is that in a lot of the people in that industry do not consider themselves a tech person. So it kind of already makes it quite difficult to engage with them, because they're like, oh, no, I'm not a techie person. And so they're already, very, very difficult to engage with from that perspective. I think a lot of it as well is the gap that I see is that you've got technology companies trying to sell you this fantastic product or piece of software, and they'll tell you all of these amazing things it can do, but not in the context of that business or industry. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real challenge, is because for those businesses, then they're thinking, okay, well, that sounds like a really good product, but I still don't see how it's going to help my business. Mm-hmm. And so I think making a business case for those technology solutions is really important. I think also that the people it's really quite fascinating, because it's quite interesting when I talk to business owners in that industry, they have the same expectations we do as consumers. Yeah, so they would fully expect to be able to go online, book their experience. And I completely agree with Joshua that this situation is going to force a lot of that to happen. So even if it's about me going to the gym, the chances are for a period of time, we are going to have booking systems. And as consumers, we've got a really high expectation of that experience and how that is going to work. But what's really interesting is a lot of those business owners do not apply that to their own business. They kind of go, well, look, the system's always worked this way. Our customers will be upset if we change it. You're kind of saying, no, it's really not fit for purpose now, but they're kind of adamantly sort of hanging on to what they already know. So I always find that a very strange position, that as customers, they have one expectation, but as business owners, we actually don't. I think one of the other challenges I found with new technology and bringing that into leisure and tourism is that sometimes it feels like they're selling me a solution to a problem I don't believe I have. Yeah. And again, that goes back to that business case, that they really do have to present that in context. So even if it can be applied in many other businesses and industries, fine. But what those businesses are looking for is they want to understand how it's going to benefit their business and how it will grow their business. What challenges or problems are you actually fixing for me? I think it's also critically important that we educate people in the industry. I think on both sides, I think that the tech industry has to look at what are the challenges and opportunities we're about to hit, either post-COVID or let's say the next 6 to 12 months, and Brexit. Yeah. So how, with our changing behaviours, because we're all going to, you know, this new normal, which nobody knows what it looks like, that will bring with it challenges, but opportunities as well. And I think the tech industry is going to be absolutely at the heart of that. And it will change fundamentally even further how we live. I mean, it's already changed, you know, how we do business and how we meet up with people and things. But I think for both sides, I think the tech industry, if you want to target leisure and tourism, then you're going to have to dig deep and really understand that marketplace and their customers to then see that the solution you're coming up with really does actually fit and solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think hugely good points, Ruth. And I think because there's been such an accelerated shift, it's trying to understand that marketplace in a true sense, in a way that we've never had to before, because we've always been a supporting partner, perhaps, or we've been used for virtual museum tours or as an aid for, you know, hill walking in Scotland, or accessing collections remotely, whereas now there's got to be a way of using technology to help drive the recovery. Aileen, I don't know if you can hear us. We had a bit of a technical problem, but I think we now have Aileen Lamb with us from Scottish Enterprise Tourism and Creative Industries. Aileen, can you hear me okay? Would you like to say a few words? That may be. I'm not sure the tech is helping us today.
Yeah.
Oh, Aileen can't hear us, unfortunately. She's tried to rejoin on a different device. Aileen, I'm really sorry. Aileen can hear us, sorry, but we can't hear Aileen. There's always got to be one technical issue. Aileen, we will catch up with you afterwards then to add your input to this. Ruth, Joshua, if I could ask you, in terms of economic recovery, if thinking nationally first with the UK government, what do you think is the single biggest thing the UK government could do to help drive the recovery in tourism?
I could start with that very simply, and you're not going to be surprised that I'm going to say this, but quite simply, if we educate and support and drive investment into digital marketing, then that will, for a lot of those businesses, be a huge step forward and really drive business growth. And I think an important part of that is actually also about us investing in talent into that industry. Because the more talent and expertise we have in digital marketing, this kind of doesn't make sense for me to say this as a business owner, but I will anyway, is that competition means that we keep a ceiling on prices. Whereas if it's very scarce, then it's obviously much easier for us to charge a lot more money. But certainly through this period of time, we have been working with a number of small businesses on very keen prices as our support, if you like, to try and help grow them. But just to throw out a number for you, for example, there are 360,000 business owners on Facebook. And yet lots of businesses rule that out. There's a huge untapped audience of people that these businesses can tap into, but it's about educating them and supporting them and giving them resources that they can take what for a lot of those businesses was really quite a big step forward. And then I think it's important that they invest in their own online experience for customers, websites, you know, that buying process and things like that. There's still a lot of them are really honestly not fit for purpose. So I think that's the UK government needs to look at that and invest and help businesses get into that area of marketing.
That makes sense. Joshua, do you want to add?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, first of all, I was just going to say, Aileen Lamb at SE has been a big driving force behind the cluster, the Travel Tech for Scotland cluster, and she deserves a huge amount of credit for that getting going. I think one of the things already, the 1 meter rule, we were talking about right at the start of the call, going from 2 meters to 1 meter or 1 meter plus is, at least in England, probably going to make a difference. And I'm not going to comment on the science of that, especially in infection control, because I just don't know enough. But just from a sort of impact on tourism perspective, the restaurants industry, events industry have been talking about this as absolutely essential. I think, you know, the financial viability of so many companies is completely shot. And I think, especially small tourism hospitality organizations, you're having big companies shedding huge numbers of staff and have no idea really what's going to happen. And I think it's actually good to have a bit of healthy skepticism about what tech can do. I think in certain things, it is about what government can do. And I think, continuing access to finance, having very specific guidance when the science can support it around how businesses can run, distancing, but also things like signage that has been designed well, that actually changes people's behavior, that actually reduces infection control. Some of that stuff isn't tech. Some of that is just, good visuals and clear guidance to reduce uncertainty. I think specifically areas of guidance is where it's about indoors, and it's about how do you manage big events, how do you manage restaurants, because they're the two that I think are the most a challenge. When we're talking to festivals in Edinburgh, the one thing they want to know from all our data projects is how can that help us make a decision around whether an event is financially viable or not? How many people can we bring through the door? And then how many people's attitudes have changed to see whether they come through the door? So we're looking at social media analysis, sentiment analysis to get a sense of that sentiment. So I think, to summarize, clear, specific guidance, which has, well evidenced scientific research behind it, that can then have tools that you can just take and run with quickly, is going to be absolutely essential. I think Scottish Government's provided some stuff recently, and that's been useful, and we've got change in that today. So that's what I think is probably most important.
Thank you. We've had a question come through from Sam Lee as well, which I think is a good one as we come to. We've got till 1 o'clock. I think we're only just scratching the surface, and we could go on an awful lot longer. But Sam's asking what you think the biggest opportunities in leisure and tourism post-COVID are. How do we balance the economic benefit that are generated in the physical visit? So I think essentially, where do you think the opportunities are post-COVID?
I would say that I think our biggest opportunity is if we get ahead of the game, and that we're planning now a strategy. For me, it would be a campaign to promote the UK, to promote Scotland, really pushing that. And I think, as Joshua was saying, I think that it's about having confidence, both here but also worldwide, that we're promoting what we're doing as a country to manage this, and then how we're going to manage encouraging people to come back and visit. I think there are going to be so many opportunities for businesses where they're going to be able to leverage this situation and actually create an online experience that maybe previous to this they didn't really have, and they were maybe relying quite heavily on traditional forms of marketing. But there have been some phenomenally brilliant examples of where businesses have pivoted, and as you say, doing guided walks, things like that. So there's lots and lots of tools out there, and I think this is really the opportunity, I think, to take a really big step forwards and actually start leading the story in that. How, as a country, we've supported our leisure and tourism businesses because they're using these tools, and we've got an online experience that then draws people to come back and visit when that's appropriate and happens. And that's essentially what my business is all about. It's about how do you create an online experience that draws people in, and then generates business.
Joshua.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with all of that. I think the digital marketing is still, like you said, not as used as much by too many tourism organisations. I think there's probably an opportunity, and it's not very specific, but it's around what's going to happen in the next 6 months, which is probably going to be domestic tourism led. Well, it's almost certainly going to be domestic tourism led. In fact, it might even be hyper local. It might be just the people who are in the very sort of short vicinity around where you are and where you live. And I think thinking about a customer journey and how that relates to a very different category of visitor would be interesting to me. I think there's some obvious ones, and there's some really good companies already starting to do well, who've been doing this for a while, which is reducing any need for physical interaction and where technology can plug that gap. You've seen a lot of hotel technology being developed, especially around registering and checking in without actually having to see people is really useful. Anything like that. There's Crichton Apps, obviously based in Edinburgh, who are doing some really interesting work there, and I think they're a good example of that. So just to summarize, I think the market is going to be very different in the next 6 months. It is going to be domestic led, and they will have different needs and wants and ideas. And so thinking about how the usual visitor journey maps onto that new market would be the way I'd start. Yeah.
Thank you. I think excellent points from both of you. And I think for me, coming from a non-tourism expert background, I am hugely interested in how we use the online as the pre-visit. Aileen's put some interesting comments into the chat there on that as well. We have a question around what the public sector can do to help tourism and hospitality SMEs to embrace digital adoption and innovation. I think actually, Ruth, you answered a lot of that previously around the support and the education, the awareness, and making the tools available. So really just to pick up on a final question we were asked to ask, which is, we've looked at what the UK government could do at a national level. What could the Scottish government do, and I suppose by association other devolved governments do, to support the recovery? In our final 3 minutes, sorry.
What I would say to that is, I think if we can attract inspirational tech leaders who either in that industry or from other industries, and it's also about, for me, because then that whole, sharing those ideas, inspiring people is a big first step. But also, I think critically, if you want to do it and hit the ground running, it's about doing a bit of that thinking and groundwork for those businesses. So it's identifying, going, right, what should our tourism businesses be doing? How can we get more of them marketing themselves online? How can we support them in reviewing what their online experience is sharing how we're seeing really good practices of that. And for me, I think rather than sharing ideas in itself and then trying to let those businesses work out, I think the likes of Scottish Enterprise, Business Gateway are integral to actually helping put those into practice, and also making sure we've got the talent and expertise, because I can say as a older person, as I am in the digital technology world, that it's a heck of a job keeping up. But there are so many good opportunities, so it is important that we keep driving talent in that industry.
Yeah, I'll be super quick because I know we're out of time. I think that, as Aileen said, there's been a huge amount from Visit Scotland, from Scottish Enterprise, that have been doing really good stuff to try and reduce that uncertainty again. Market intelligence reports, Visit Scotland, are really good. And of course, Scottish Enterprise through Scottish Government are funding the Travel Tech for Scotland initiative. And anyone can get in touch with me after this if they're interested. I see a few comments in there. Yeah. I think there's one thing which always sticks in my mind, which is around collaboration between small tourism businesses, because often it's one or two people. And, if you're trying to do data or digital or whatever it is, sometimes you just can't, because you haven't got the time, you haven't got the expertise, and that journey is too long. And I think you want to minimize risk and you want to minimize cost if you're one of those companies. And I think if you can get maybe at destination level or maybe across different subsectors collaborating to experiment with technology and share that information, and then maybe even, have some things like cooperatives that they can use share that risk across multiple different providers, could be a really interesting option. That's one we want to explore through Travel Tech for Scotland, no doubt. And I think there's a really good initiative in Scotland, the Scotland's Tech Army, and I know that they've been doing some great work with some hospitality organisations and destinations, I think in Oban and elsewhere, and that's a really wonderful initiative. There's so many great students who are studying in Scotland in technology, and it's a great place to come for that. So I think that would be an area I'd be interested in exploring a bit more as well, is how do you get maybe some students to do some small initiatives with smaller companies. So yeah, a few things there.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut it short. I think we could talk for longer on this. We're just scratching the surface. But Joshua, Ruth, thank you very much for joining the panel today. We will answer any questions that come up afterwards. I know Aileen's already offered to catch up with some people asking questions, and Josh, we appreciate that input too. And I think all we can do is work together and encourage those collaborations and initiatives as part of the recovery from the situation. Thank you both very much appreciate your time.